You can
Yeah,
start.
after you've.
Okay, we're broadcasting now, so we're live. This is part of the Carbon Corp's Nobel Grid work that we're doing. Um, this webinar is about some of the community smart grid, like a prototype really that Tristan and Dom have been working on. The project as a whole is to test out smart meters and new applications for smart meters. And this application is kind of grown out of the idea that the use of smart meter technology can be used and pooled, shared by collectives of people working together. So part of the Nobel Grid project is to test out the smart meters in Greater Manchester in our pilot area, but with people working together. So this work that Tristan and Dom have been doing kind of comes out of our project. It's kind of not part of the project directly at the moment, but hopefully it will inform it, and it might be that we can use aspects of it. So yeah, we're going to talk a bit about that, hopefully for the next like half an hour, three-quarters of an hour. Do you want to add anything, Tristan or Dom?
No, I think that's good.
That's a good introduction.
Could you, both of you, just one by one, just quickly introduce yourselves, your backgrounds, and kind of how you sit within this project and within Carbon Co-op and Open Energy Monitor? Do you want to start, Dom?
Okay. Yeah, my name's Dominic McCann. I'm a Carbon Co-op member, and I've had my house retrofitted by Carbon Co-op to a very high standard of energy efficiency. I have been monitoring energy use, household energy use, for at least 10 years, probably closer to 15 years, and getting more and more detailed in that analysis over that time. I've also been going to the Eco Home Lab meetings the last couple of years.
An Eco Home Lab is basically a meetup group in Manchester. We've got, I think there's about more than 100 people signed up to the meetup, but usually it's kind of 6, 10, 12 people working, usually developing Open Energy Monitor.
That's right, and I've been using an Open Energy Monitor for the last year and a half, the eMonPy, the latest version of it, for about 9 months. So maybe that's where I can hand over to Tristan.
Okay. Yep. I'm Tristan. I'm from the Open Energy Monitor project, or I work on the Open Energy Monitor project. It's a project to develop open source tools that help us understand our use of energy, whether that's home energy monitoring or solar PV monitoring, and relating that really to the larger context of sustainable energy. So I've also been doing, I have a whole set of different things at home that are sort of testing this stuff out, which relates to this work on the smart grid dashboard. But last year I did, partly instigated by this Carbon Co-op project, I did some research on Zero Carbon Britain, which is a 10-year hourly energy model for the UK, how we could supply with 100% renewable energy. And they've done a lot of thorough work on this, looking at a different mix of renewables, different mix of storage technologies, different levels of demand shifting, and sort of putting all of that together into a worked out scenario for how the UK could run off renewable energy. And so that sort of gives a kind of theoretical basis, I guess. And I'm interested then using these tools and using these open source tools in order to be able to work out how close to the model sort of we can, reality might be, or as as an increasing number of people have these technologies, from heat pumps, electric vehicles, or solar PV, or retrofitted houses, to see how close these we have these technologies are. There's enough of those technologies out in the field now to start to actually see how well they add up to models such as Zero Carbon Britain, which is really where my interest in developing this tool that I guess we're going to demo today sort of arises from, and testing this out in my own in my own house, I guess, and seeing how well it works.
Yeah. And so I think that's something to kind of emphasize here, is that people are talking about smart grids and aggregation in different ways, potentially saving people money and enabling people to save money through aggregation. But I think it feels like your primary kind of interest on this has been around the Zero Carbon Britain ideal, about how groups and communities of people can kind of live within their carbon budgets. Would you say that's the case?
Well, yeah, just how close what we're building can add up to what Zero Carbon Britain are suggesting. But I guess the aggregation side of it, which we're exploring here, is testing that thing of how we often see we'll often look at these systems on an individual household basis, and matching your on-site solar to your consumption. But there seems, and then if we bring storage technology into that, we might be shifting home solar to the evening, so we can use that energy from the solar in the evening. But then it's very interesting, is that when you bring in that aggregation, what does that enable? Does that mean that we need less home storage, or how would those dynamics actually work in practice? I guess. I mean, there's a huge number of questions in there that's be interesting to get a better handle of.
Before we start talking about the technology, Dom, do you want to add to that, kind of what your motivations were for getting involved with this and for starting this prototype?
Yeah. As I said, I've been monitoring our energy use in various ways for the last 15 years or so, and it became obvious to me that I was primarily interested in carbon emissions as well and reducing those. And it became obvious to me that, or it became apparent that there might be ways of saving carbon by shifting when we consume electricity from, say, peak in the evening to another time of day. But there wasn't an easy way of quantifying, and perhaps there still isn't, but there wasn't an easy way of quantifying exactly what the effect of shifting how many kilowatt hours from this time to this other time. So I started looking at that. I started looking at battery storage, as Tristan has mentioned, and basically it threw up a whole load of questions, and I've put a few of those into the blog on the Carbon Corp website.
And just to clarify, as a householder, you have solar PV panels?
That's correct, yeah.
How many? What kilowatt?
We have 3.3 kilowatts of solar PV, which generates over a year about 2,600 kilowatt hours, which is just slightly more than we usually use. We usually use about 2,200.
But so at certain times of year you're kind of self-sufficient, but others you're exporting, or how does that work?
Yeah, well, as Tristan has mentioned, at certain times of year, in June, say, over the month, we produce 2 or 3 times more electricity than we're actually using. So we're exporting 60-70% of what we're generating. But we're still importing electricity from the grid because
Yeah.
in the evening there's no sun, so we're importing grid electricity.
Yeah.
Obviously, our exports get shared across the grid
Yeah.
with everybody else potentially, or there's different ways of looking at it, and this is where the questions come in.
Yeah. Yeah.
And so, am I sharing it with our neighbours? How far am I sharing it? Is it pushing down the amount of, well, it will be pushing down the amount of carbon-based fuels being used on the grid.
Yeah.
But exactly how many tons of carbon is being saved is one of those many questions.
Yeah.
Which we have some answers to, but we're still working on them.
And we'll have a look at the tool. But just the last thing to say maybe is that as part of the Nobel Grid project, that you'll hopefully be testing out one of these batteries, which I think is a 10 kilowatt hour one. But some of the work you've done suggests that maybe that's too big for what you actually need. But
yes. Anything above about 4 kilowatt hour battery will take our house off grid effectively from April through till September, and then and for the other months, the autumn, winter months, will be partly off grid. We'll be about 40% off grid and 60% importing electricity.
And you know that from some of the graphs you've been doing and some of the monitoring work.
Now, having a bigger battery doesn't improve that greatly, but it might offer the opportunity to share some of the stored electricity with other people if there was a microgrid. Another thing to explore, perhaps.
Okay, so that gives people a bit of a background in terms of your motivations, kind of why you're involved. Dom, as a householder, as an active householder, is involved in kind of development. Prosumer is the kind of common term because you're producing and consuming. Tristan, someone obviously who's very versed in the technology, but also you have your house is. What do you want to share with people what you've got, just briefly?
Yeah. There's 2.4 kilowatts of PV and heat pump, Mitsubishi Kodan heat pump for the heating, and an electric car, Nissan Leaf. So, but a relatively leaky house in terms of But
and so for people,
it's
so you're kind of.
Sorry.
What's that? Do you want to say again?
Well, testing some of those large demand side changes. Electrification changes. Which is quite interesting. Quite interesting in the context of this, looking at how we match supply and demand. Is when is the right time? When's the best time to charge the car? When's the best time to run the heat pump and so on?
And because pricing's relatively well, there are two price bands in the UK: daytime and evening or nighttime. So at the moment, you're testing when is the right time to charge your EV vehicle or to shift your usage of your heat pump, or to you don't have a battery, but if you did, when to store electricity. So at the moment, you're thinking about these in carbon terms rather than in price terms, but it might be something in the future that with dynamic pricing might come into play.
Yes, that's it. It's just very interesting how you can be quite limited to an extent So to the degree I can shift things, I can certainly do some shifting with the electric car time, charge time, but you come up against all the challenges that everyone will have with these technologies in terms of if you're out in the middle of the day, then you can't match it with your home solar, or to all sorts of different. Also with the heat pump, there's no thermal storage in it at the moment, and then you need, if you want to run it first thing in the morning and when you get back in the evening, then you're sort of restricted there. But it's interesting testing that out, and then you can see, you start to think about what you might need to add in order to have the ability to shift that, say that heating, have the heat pump run earlier in the day, store it in hot water, then heat the room over that peak time. Those would be things I'd like to test, but
yeah. And just to say, hopefully, I know the pilot is mostly in Greater Manchester, but it might be that we can include you, despite the fact you're living in North Wales, and it might be that we're looking into whether we can do some kind of automated demand shifting or manual demand shifting via a smart meter with your heat pump. So that'd be really interesting. So yeah, Dom, you've got your battery. Hopefully you'll have a battery and solar PV. Tristan, you've got your base load from your heat pump. You've got your panels. You've got your electric vehicle, and is that it? Yeah, seems quite a lot. But Tristan, you're almost kind of this vision of a future person, aren't you? The prosumer, because you've got this massive flexible load, basically, especially with the electric vehicle, with the heat pump, and what have you. Okay, I think we should just move on now, and now we know kind of your motivations and what you've got. We'd like to have a look at the tool that you've been developing, which is kind of a proof of concept kind of idea. Who'd like to talk about that and present that?
Do you want to start, Dominic?
Go. Okay then. Yeah.
Who's going to share their screen?
Are you sharing your screen, or shall I share mine? Here we go. I'll share it.
Okay.
Is that working?
Yes.
Yeah. Right. Shall I start at the top?
Okay, so you're going to talk through every aspect of this.
Can do.
And just, yeah, so...
So that's better. Is that better?
Yeah. That's great.
Okay. Well, I guess maybe it's worth mentioning that it came from individual screen, individual energy monitor dashboard. Maybe I'll try and get that one up. Can you see that one? No?
Not yet.
No, we can see you again.
Yeah, we can see you, Dom.
Right. Okay, hold on. I'll go. Yeah, this one. I'll show this first.
Yeah.
This is,
right. Emon CMS, yeah?
Yeah, this is the basic Emon CMS solar plus wind dashboard, which is for our house over the last 24 hours.
Okay. So what are we seeing here? What's the blue and what's the yellow and the grey line?
The blue is our consumption. So this was 4 o'clock in the afternoon. Here, can you see my cursor?
Yeah, that's a peak. Yeah.
A peak there around 4 o'clock in the afternoon, where the oven probably went on for our little lad's tea. And then there's a general activity in the evening. And then through the middle of the night, consumption plateaus to a sort of baseline kind of level with little peaks, which you can see there, which is the fridge
Oh yeah.
coming on periodically.
Yeah.
And then obviously we get up in the morning, this morning, put the coffee maker on, and then the yellow is our solar PV.
Okay.
And the last couple of days have been fairly cloudy,
Yeah.
so there's not been that much. Along the bottom here,
Yeah.
you can see that over the last 24 hours, the house has consumed 7.5 kilowatt hours.
Okay.
There's been our share of the wind across the national grid.
Let's talk about that in a
We'll
little
talk
bit.
about that afterwards, probably.
Yeah,
I'll
yeah.
move on to solar. That's fairly easy. That's the total amount of yellow bits. So that's yesterday afternoon there, and today through till right now.
So over the last 24 hours, you've generated probably about 40% of what you've used, something like that?
Well, generated slightly more than that, but
yeah.
We've been able to consume 3.1 kilowatt hours of the 3.3. So 3.1 of the 3.3 has been consumed in the house.
Yeah.
Oh, it's gone down slightly. And then store kind of means what we've imported from the grid.
Okay. Yeah. So they add up to 100%.
They add up to 100%.
Yeah.
And so this is where it started, really, the idea of the virtual smart grid. We have...
But just to clarify, this is your typical kind of energy usage that we see on most homes, which is more energy used in the mornings and in the afternoon, evenings. There you go. That's over a week, is it?
A week. That's a week.
So yeah, energy used in the mornings and the evenings. Lulls at night and in the day when people go out. But as you can see, you being a prosumer, the yellows are the peaks of solar production. Again, generally in the middle of the day when everyone's out.
Yeah, that's right. And you can see there are some days in the last week that have been very sunny. So when was it? Was that Sunday? That's Wednesday. Yeah, that was Sunday was sunny. Saturday, Friday. Thursday was very sunny.
Yeah.
The other aspect on here is that you mentioned is the balance, which is the grey line.
Okay, so what's the grey line?
Which shows it's imagining that this is kind of got an infinite store, and that's why you've got store at the bottom there. So you've got a store that you can store all this solar somewhere, and then you either use it from there or you use it directly. And as I was saying, this is kind of the idea that Tristan and I talked about. Could we take the data from this dashboard and share it collectively with more than one household? So
just to confirm, the store is you're putting in solar energy into the store?
Yeah.
Yeah, purely solar energy. So that when you're generating the store, the grey line increases, and then when you cease generating, you're virtually taking energy from this imaginary store, so that the grey line reduces. Yeah,
that's
is that the case?
Yeah.
And so the peaks relate to high solar production, the troughs to high usage, or like relatively high usage over time. And why did you create this like functionality? What's the purpose of doing that?
Well, it gives a, I guess it gives a good sort of at a glance view of the balance between production and consumption over that period that you're looking at in the window. So you can see with that you can see how many days did that really sunny day sort of last, as it were.
Mm.
You can see from the extent of the store that it's covering a range from 0 to about 18 kilowatt hours. So
Right.
that would require quite a big store to give all of that range.
Yeah.
Although it might not be, well, it would be, and at present costs of storage, it wouldn't likely be that
No.
financially viable to do it, to have on that size. But it helps to show you the kind of range that you're going over, I guess, and whether, I mean, over that period there, the general trend was for the store it's gone from 0 up to 7.8. So that means that we should have produced more. It's not, there's some discrepancy there, but
maybe I'll just refresh the page. Sometimes needs refreshing.
Is it? Oh, that's interesting. Yeah, okay. So the virtual store charge rate, that's the green figure right in the centre. Is that the current? What is that? Yeah. The 144, 142 watts. What's that?
Okay. That's quite straightforward. The power now, the blue power now, is how much our household is consuming right now. The renewable generation over here is how much solar plus a share of the wind across the national grid.
Yeah.
Where in the dashboard, the user, that's me, can choose how much wind I'm notionally pulling, how much wind energy I'm notionally pulling from the grid. So you can see that there's 252 watts of solar, and my share of the wind that I've allocated myself is 32 watts. Now, that adds up to 282 watts at the moment.
Okay.
So the balance is that 150 minus 284 now adds up to 135 as a negative number, which means that I'm pushing 135, 134 watts. In this case, it says virtual store. I'm pushing it into this virtual store for use later, following the grey line.
Okay. So just
I guess two things to note. The wind. The share of wind is based on real-time data from the national grid on the UK wind output.
Okay, well, let's talk about that in detail now. So this number at the bottom, so you've got house and then you've got wind. Do you want to just explain that fully, Tristan or Dom, whoever? Do you want to explain what that's based on?
Yeah. So that, I mean, so the idea with the wind was, if you get your energy from a green energy supplier, such as Good Energy or Ecotricity, then a fairly high percentage of your electricity or your fuel mix is from wind, something between 60%. And so the idea here was to test, rather than just match your consumption with your solar, have the ability to bring in the data set about for wind generation, so that you could see, so you could match your consumption to wind generation, which basically means you have something often at night that you can. There is some power after the sun's gone down that is available to you. It's not just
some low carbon power.
That's it.
Yeah.
So. The scaling of that wind power is calculated as you assume. Well, you work out how much energy you consume on an annual basis, and then you effectively, I guess, buy a certain, say like 60% of your annual consumption from wind, this is like the exercise, I guess, that and then it can then scale the output of UK wind, which is in megawatts, into a sort of a share of wind in watts.
Okay.
And so if you did add up all the wind power here, it should equate to your annual annual allocation figure, as it were.
Okay. As a
It should be
percentage, as a proportion of the entire UK wind generation. So it's not very localized, but it's a kind of proxy.
That's it. Yeah. So it's just to allow testing of that idea, to see when is it likely that there is a lot of wind power available, or when is the wind not blowing, and so on.
Yeah.
And can you, in the same way as we are able to match consumption to solar production, you can start to do the same with grid wind power as well.
And your aim here is low carbon, isn't it? So it's kind of say, I want to use as low carbon energy as possible, therefore I'll use the solar PV that I generate, which is obviously kind of carbon free, and then also I will favour electricity from the grid when there is high wind production. Is that accurate?
Yeah. Yes, that's it. Yeah.
And then this is an exercise in kind of a virtual storage thing. So your virtual storage unit is kind of taking into account those two elements, the solar PV generation and the wind from the grid.
Yeah. I mean, in a way, this virtual storage thing, I'm not entirely sure how much, it's sort of slightly interesting, but this has kind of evolved now over to this this new tool that we've been working on, which is more.
Can we have a look at the new tool? And so that's an individual one. That's one household, and that this current view we're looking at, that's available for open energy monitors at the moment through your EMON CMS. Yeah, and so we'll now look at the aggregated kind of thing. Yeah, that'd be good.
Yes. Here you go. Okay. Do you want to discuss that, Tristan?
Yeah. Okay. I mean, this sort of I guess building on that earlier dashboard. I mean, this was instigated by yourself, Dominic, with wanting to, rather than have a sort of a store, think about when you're pulling electricity from the grid at times when there isn't any renewable energy, you're actually importing at the grid intensity at that time. Maybe it's easy. Maybe it'd be better if you elaborate on that, I think. And
yeah, if we look at the graph here, so here we've got another data set, which is the UK grid intensity. So how much carbon is generated for each kilowatt of power that's consumed from the grid. And obviously at certain times of day, especially in the evening around 6 to 8 p.m, everyone is trying to use power at the moment as they get home from work, and nobody has the ability to shift what they're doing really. They're just choosing, they have to use power when they get home from work and do what everyone would do in the evening. So what happens then is fossil fuel power stations are turned up, more coal is shoveled into the coal-fired power stations, the tap on the gas-fired power stations is opened up, and more fossil fuel power is pushed onto the electricity grid. So the carbon intensity goes up because the share of other things, wind, hydro, nuclear, which we'll talk about perhaps about nuclear, don't change or just change according to the wind strength on that particular day. So there's always a peak in how much fossil fuels is used around the evening, and then there's always typically a trough in the middle of the night when everyone's gone to bed, when only their fridges and internet routers and phones on standby are still plugged in. Some industry is still running, so there's always a trough in the evening when there's less going on.
So that's the red line.
That's the red line, and then this is a dashboard that pulls together 6 different households.
Yeah.
6 different users.
So they're listed on the left-hand side, H1 to H6, yeah.
And the blue shown on this graph is the same as it was before. It's the consumption, but this time it's the total consumption pulling together those 6 users.
Yeah.
The yellow is the same as before, is the solar.
Yeah.
I think, you can see there that 4 of the users have got solar on site. The two that have got 0 against them don't have solar. So the yellow there is the summing of those 4 solar PV systems.
Yeah.
And then the orange line is imagining, or well, it's more than imagining. It's the calculation of the amount of power that is being pulled from the grid that isn't being supplied by solar or by wind or by hydro.
And hydro, is that a similar thing to the assumption that Tristan was talking about with the wind? It's like a notional kind of allocation it gives an idea of grid intensity.
Yeah, here we go down here. This is where you can select various things, the mix of supply. So the default at the moment is based on a typical household consumption of 3,300 kilowatt hours per year. Of that, 1,980, which represents 60%, of that is notionally supplied by wind, and 660 kilowatt hours notionally supplied by hydro from the grid, all of which is real time. So it's the actual amount of wind being generated and the actual amount of hydro being generated real time. So when there's no sun, like this little selection here, the amount of consumption here, let's look at this little peak, wasn't being able to be supplied by the wind or by the hydro.
Yeah.
So it's from here, from that point here to that point here upwards. That many kilowatts had to come from the grid more generally. So is based on the carbon intensity of the grid using the options down here. So we're selecting that the grid includes nuclear, coal, gas, interconnect, other, but is not counting the renewables because we've already allocated our share of renewables here. So we have taken that out of the mix so as not to double count.
And can I just ask where you're getting those grid intensity figures from, that live grid feed?
Tristan?
Yeah, that's from BM reports, so it's the National Grid. They provide a whole load of data that you can access.
Okay. And it breaks down the current grid production into those different fuel types and different generation types.
Yeah, that's it. And then you multiply those quantities, the amount of gas, the amount of coal, by the carbon intensity of that source, and then that from that you can calculate the grid intensity.
And is that a calculation you do, or do you take that a feed?
That's a calculation we do in this dashboard. So if I remember, say coal is 900 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour, and gas is about 380 grams of CO2 per kilowatt hour. So when you have a lot more coal on there, your carbon intensity goes up pretty high. So it's basically the proportion. The carbon intensity is the proportion between all those different. It's weighted by the amount of supply from each different source, as it were.
Yeah. So, sorry, Dom, go on then. In that instance where your the local supply, the demand outstrips the local supply of renewables, what then you're taking grid electricity from the grid at whatever intensity is that happening at the moment. Yeah.
Yeah, that's right. Just going around the dashboard a bit further, this top bit is also just very simple but very interesting or intuitive, I suppose. There are two traffic light indicators at the moment, one's green, one's red. So the UK grid is currently shown as red in our dashboard, and that is based on these values up here. So the grid notionally has 385 grams of CO2 for every kilowatt hour of electricity being consumed. On the grid there are 819 megawatts of wind, there is 1,940 megawatts of solar, and there is 406 megawatts of hydro. We've set certain thresholds so that the UK grid status traffic light here goes from green if there's loads of wind or solar or hydro, but hydro is usually quite small, so it's only a small contribution. But if the total of the wind, solar and hydro are high enough, and the grid carbon, this value here, is low enough, then the traffic light goes green. If it's in the middle, then it goes amber. And if there's not much wind, not much solar, and not much hydro, and the carbon is quite high, then it goes red. And currently red, meaning the implication would be if users could turn things off, this might be quite a good time from a grid point of view.
From a carbon,
and then we've got a virtual microgrid status. So this is looking at this rather than just the national grid on its own. It's looking at the status really over here. So if we focus in on right now,
you're able to interrogate this it's scalable, isn't it?
You can see that we're actually generating more solar than solar plus wind plus hydro than we're using.
Beyond
you can see that over here we're currently exporting 490 watts. So we've defined our virtual microgrid as green if we're exporting, or if we're only importing a very small amount of electricity. And then it would go amber if we're importing and still not very large amount of electricity at a moderate carbon intensity, and then would go red if we're really importing.
If your production is low and your consumption is high. And this is this is on the basis of the grid, the virtual microgrid. The people are living all over, aren't they? It's distributed, but it's kind of taking things on a national basis.
And we can probably show this. We can probably show this in real time if I go and put the kettle on.
You're all right. But can I just can you go through the houses? Why is it that the far right hand column they're all green except for the last one?
Yeah, so what it's showing there is um,
Oh,
yeah, that's the kettle's just gone on.
yes. Yeah, go on, Tristan. Then.
So, well, you've got an individual household status there, so it's just assuming that that house is importing from the grid when it's and then that's the carbon intensity of that imported electricity.
Yes.
But so that the individual household indicator doesn't take into account the wider microgrid.
Right.
But it's useful to see, I guess it's like another way of looking at it, but
yeah. But could you just explain? So there are H3 and H6, but neither of them have on-site solar. But that's an issue for H6. There's like a red, use less energy. But why isn't that the case for H3?
Okay, so H3 has a certain amount of electricity available from hydro and wind, which is currently at 115 watts, and so they are notionally exporting, or they're not using the share of their wind or hydro that's available.
So their consumption is low. Possibly they're not in.
Yeah. So that power is being exported. There's a positive balance and is available for other people in the microgrid.
Yes.
Where H6 is it still has 115 watts of available wind and hydro, but the consumption is 600 watts higher than that share, and so there's an import there. But actually, in terms of the overall view of the microgrid, there's enough export from the other houses in order to cover the import of H6, and so that's why the virtual microgrid status is green or low CO2. But if you just viewed it on an individual household basis, that house would be red.
So, and that's summarised just below the houses, H1 to 6. You've got your total generation, total consumption, and you're exporting at this time.
Yeah.
That's right. Maybe we should say we've had this dashboard up and running for how long? About 11 days or something, is that? 12 days?
Yeah, that's it.
And already it's proving very, very informative.
What sort of lessons have you learned from it then? You had an email the other day about solar production and wind and that sort of thing.
Well, it's interesting to see how different technologies, such as heat pumps and electric vehicles, are being used collectively as on this microgrid. Also seeing when the solar is available, pooled across 6 users. And also looking at how the carbon being generated might be able to be reduced by time shifting, certainly by more use of the on-site solar.
So what you're saying there, on the graph, the orange line shows the virtual carbon usage of the microgrid, yeah?
Yeah.
And so an implication of this is that consumption could better match production. What this suggests is that when those two things are out of sync, and you can see in the middle there, big peak of solar production, and then followed by then usage, that then carbon shoots up high, so that if you could better match production and consumption, then the virtual grid you would have a lot lower. Is that the case?
That's right. But yeah, that's absolutely right. And it shows, if we look at this particularly sunny day, yeah. Yeah, there we go.
Oh yeah.
You can see that actually carbon emissions were zero effectively from 10 o'clock in the morning through till past 4 o'clock in the afternoon effectively.
Wow. Yeah. The microgrid. Yeah.
Across the microgrid, because the entire consumption across that period was effectively being provided, and more so, there was a huge export of solar here.
Yeah.
I mean, a good example on that day is that the slight peak in consumption around 2 o'clock was I timed the heat pump to heat my hot water cylinder over time. So that's the heat pump running at quite high output.
So you shifted your usage there to benefit from the excess solar production.
Yeah, that's it. But you can see how much larger the available solar production is.
Yeah.
At that time, and I was actually out all day on that day. I was out mountain biking.
Yeah.
The big block at the start of the day when we didn't have much solar was me charging the car.
Yeah.
And so I wasn't able to, because I was out in that day, I wasn't able to charge that at the ideal time.
Yeah. How did you manage to get your heat pump to come on? Was that an automated thing, or is that are you able to manually turn that on via an app or something?
Just using the time. Well, the heat pump has a little controller, and you can just set an on time and off time. So it's just a very basic sort of timer controller.
So did you anticipate this peak and set the timer? But potentially in the future, if we're testing this out on the Nobel Grid project, it might be that could be automated. That you might be out mountain biking, but the heat pump comes on to take advantage of an excess period of solar. And on that, if we were just looking at your personal solar production, would your heat pump exceed or fit within your production?
Do you want to just untick all the solar apart from the top one there, Dominic?
Oh, that's really interesting, isn't it? Wow. Yeah, great. So, the top. Yeah. So just about, but then I guess you're the only one with a heat pump, aren't you?
Yes. Yeah. Well, there's one other household with a heat pump, but yeah. Yeah,
and obviously there are other. If we were it will be very interesting when there are more than just 6 users on this microgrid. There will be other technologies, very widespread ones, such as immersion heaters, which consume a fair amount of electricity, that also could be used to, with a timer or with a smart control to be shifted from one time of day to another time of day when there's plenty of solar or when there's plenty of wind energy on the grid. Do you want to explain any other things that you're interested from it?
Yes. I wonder if you could. Shall I just switch over to using the screen here, and I can?
Yeah. You go ahead.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, can you see this here? Should be the
Yeah.
same. Okay, so going back, so looking at over the last 11 days or so. So what you see here is like the overall level of matching between the renewable generation and the consumption. So 55% of the energy was consumed directly from renewable energy in that period, and there were total generation of 652 kilowatt hours. Total consumption was a little bit higher, but they're fairly close. But the this matching figure is very interesting because the zero carbon Britain model suggests that with smart charging of electric vehicles and heat pumps that are sort of more constant output, you can achieve as high as 89% matching without large storage technologies. Or actually, I think it might be a bit less than that, maybe about 85%. Although you are using the large storage technology available in the electric car for your smart charging. But it sort of outlines...
Tristan?
Hello?
Yeah, we've lost Jonathan, apparently. And he says he has to leave it there.
Okay.
We've lost our connection. Have to end it there, sadly, he says.
Oh, the actual... Okay, right.
I think we've lost the Google Hangout connection, although you and I are still here.
Well, should
yeah.
we...
I don't know if we've still got an audience.
Is it worth... Well, shall I just finish that off and then...
Just in case he's recording it or something.
Okay, I'll just do that and then we can... Yeah, so I guess over that 11-day period, it's showing a 55% matching, but last week, the matching was higher, about 65%. And this was partly because I was working from home and I was able to charge the car during the day, and I was also traveling less. So the matching, because the car is such a large load, it was possible to achieve a higher overall matching in that week than it has been in the last 5 days, where I've been away from not working from home. And you can see here the charging in the night here, when the actual available wind power was very, very low.
It's been very wind still, hasn't it, for the last 3 days?
Sort of exceptionally so.
Yeah.
But it highlights, if I was able to do that charging in the day, that might have been better. But it's not been particular. It sort of highlights that how from one week to the next you can have, or depending on what how you're what you're doing one week to the next, it can have a large effect on your overall level of matching, I guess.
Absolutely, and it highlights perhaps how matching might need to happen sometimes over short time scales and sometimes over longer time scales.
Yeah. I guess there's a lot to cover in terms of the overall grid intensity and things around marginal grid intensity that might be worth coming back to once we know if in another...
We've lost the session, so I think we'll cover that some of the time.
All right.
And also we can possibly cover price, which I think we will probably have a way of doing, even if we just start on a very, very simple level. But I think eventually we'll be able to work price as well. which I think we will probably have a way of doing.
Hi there.
Just start at a full level, but I think eventually we'll be able to work on price as well.
Sorry, I dropped out there.
A way of doing.
Do you think it carried on recording through that period?
But I think eventually we'll be able to work on price as well.
Sorry, I dropped out there.